Have you ever made a split-second decision that completely altered the trajectory of your life? Picture the most dangerous night of the year, the annual mating frenzy, hormones raging, wolves losing their minds, and safety completely thrown out the window. Now, picture abandoning your only safe haven to drag a frail, bleeding stranger out of the crossfire. That's exactly what 22-year-old Delwyn Miller did. She thought she was just saving a helpless elderly woman from a violent pack brawl. She had absolutely no idea that the frail woman shivering in her arms was the long-lost mother of the most ruthless alpha king in North America. Keep listening, because this story goes off the rails fast. If you asked anyone in the Silver Creek Pack about the annual mating frenzy, they would describe it as a beautiful primal tradition. A night where wolves submitted to the moon, shedding their human inhibitions to find their fated mates under the canopy of the dense Oregon pines. But if you asked Delwyn Miller, she would tell you the truth. It was a terrifying, chaotic nightmare. Delwyn was an omega in the rigid hierarchy of werewolf society. That meant she was the bottom of the food chain, a glorified servant tasked with cleaning up the messes the dominant wolves left behind. At 22, she was technically of mating age, but she had zero desire to participate. For an omega, the frenzy didn't mean romance. It meant vulnerability. Unmated males drunk on cheap bourbon and raw adrenaline often lost their minds during the blood moon. It was 11:45 p.m. Delwyn was hiding in the suffocating heat of the Packus's walk-in pantry, sitting on a sack of flour and clutching her phone. Outside the thick metal door, the heavy bar of the courtyard stereo vibrated against the walls. Howls pierced the night air, followed by the sound of breaking glass and aggressive growling. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from her friend Sarah, who worked in the laundry sector. "Are you safe? The West Coast rogues crashed the perimeter. Dominic is furious. Stay inside." Delwyn swallowed hard, her thumbs trembling as she typed back. "In the pantry, locked the deadbolt. Be careful." Alpha Dominic was the leader of Silver Creek, a proud, vain man who cared more about his public image than the safety of his lower-ranking members. If rogues had breached the perimeter during the most sacred night of the year, it meant the pack's security was a joke. It also meant the woods outside were a death trap. Trying to calm her racing heart, Delwyn stood up and peered through the small frosted window near the ceiling of the pantry. It offered a limited view of the gravel driveway leading towards the dense tree. The moon cast an eerie crimson glow over the property. That was when she saw her. Near the edge of the woods, stumbling over the exposed roots of a massive oak tree, was a woman. She wasn't shifting. She wasn't running with the agility of a wolf. She was elderly, wearing a torn, mud-caked nightgown that looked completely out of place at a werewolf gathering. Her silver hair was matted with dirt and dried blood. Delwyn pressed her face against the glass, squinting. "Who is that?" she thought. The woman clearly didn't belong to Silver Creek. Elders in their pack were treated with reverence and kept safely indoors during the frenzy. Suddenly, two massive wolves emerged from the shadows of the trees. One was a mottled brown, the other a terrifying pitch-black brute. Delwyn recognized them immediately, even in their shifted forms. Tucker and Brett, two of Dominic's most volatile enforcers. They were completely feral, their eyes blown wide with the madness of the blood moon. They weren't looking for mates. They were looking for a hunt. They flanked the elderly woman, snapping their jaws and driving her back against the trunk of the oak tree. The woman collapsed to her knees, raising frail, trembling hands to protect her face. Delwyn's breath hitched. Pack law was absolute. An omega does not interfere with enforcers. To do so was treason. But watching the massive black wolf bare its teeth, preparing to lunge at a defenseless old woman, made Delwyn's stomach churn with violent nausea. She didn't think. If she had thought about it, she would have stayed in the pantry. Delwyn grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a massive cast iron skillet hanging above the prep station, and snatched a can of industrial bear mace the kitchen staff kept for actual grisly encounters near the dumpsters. She unlocked the heavy steel door, the humid night air slamming into her face, thick with the scent of pine, spilled beer, and predatory aggression. She sprinted across the gravel. The music from the courtyard masked the sound of her footsteps. "Hey!" Delwyn screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with terror. "Don't get away from her." The two wolves snapped their heads toward her. The brown wolf, Tucker, let out a low, vibrating growl, annoyed by the interruption. He took a step toward Delwyn, his lips curling back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Delwyn didn't hesitate. As Tucker lunged, she pressed the trigger on the bear mace. A thick orange cloud of concentrated capsaicin blasted directly into the wolf's eyes and snout. Tucker shrieked, a horrifying human-sounding sound mixed with a canine yelp, and scrambled backwards, clawing blindly at his own face. The black wolf Brett roared in fury and leapt at Delwyn. She swung the heavy cast iron skillet with everything she had, fueled by pure, unadulterated panic. The heavy iron connected with the side of the wolf's skull with a sickening crack. Brett stumbled, disoriented, shaking his massive head. It bought her exactly 3 seconds. Delwyn dropped the skillet, grabbed the frail woman by the arm, and pulled her up. "Run. Come on, you have to move." The elderly woman was incredibly weak, her skin ice cold despite the summer heat. But she leaned heavily against Delwyn, and together they staggered away from the treant, moving blindly towards the side of the pack house, where the old root cellar was hidden beneath overgrown blackberry bushes. Behind them, a furious roar shook the ground. Brett had recovered. Delwyn felt the rush of wind before she felt the pain. 3 massive claws rad down her left shoulder, tearing through her cotton shirt and slicing into her flesh. She cried out, the burning agony nearly dropping her to her knees. But she couldn't stop. If she fell, they were both dead. Using her good arm, she hauled the woman through the thorny bushes, ignoring the scratches tearing at her face and legs. She kicked open the rotting wooden doors of the root cellar, practically throwing the elderly woman inside, and dove in after her. Delwyn pulled the doors shut just as Brett slammed his heavy paws against the wood above them. She scrambled backward in the pitch black, dragging the woman with her into the dusty, earth-smelling darkness, praying the old iron latch would hold. Above them, the wood splintered as the massive black wolf scratched and bit at the cellar doors. Dust and debris rained down on Delwyn's face. She wrapped her arms around the elderly woman, pulling her deep into the farthest corner of the underground room, hiding behind stacks of ancient, empty mason jars and rotting wooden crates. Delwyn pressed her hand over her own mouth to muffle her ragged breathing. Her shoulder was on fire, warm blood soaking the left side of her shirt and dripping down her arm. For 10 agonizing minutes, the beast above them clawed at the entrance. But the cellar doors were built decades ago, reinforced with heavy iron to withstand harsh winters and wild animal attacks. Eventually, the frenzy took over the wolf's attention. A howl erupted from the main courtyard, drawing Brett away. The heavy thud of his paws retreated into the distance. Delwyn let out a shaky exhale, slumping against the dirt wall. "You are bleeding, child." The voice was raspy, dry as autumn leaves, but it held a strange, undeniable authority. Delwyn fumbled in her pocket, pulling out her phone and turning on the flashlight. The harsh white beam illuminated the small cellar. She turned the light to the woman sitting beside her. Up close, the woman looked even worse. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp and bruised. Her lips were cracked and her wrists. Delwyn gasped when she saw them. Around the woman's frail wrists were deep infected burns. Silver burns, the unmistakable mark of silver shackles used to subdue powerful werewolves. "I'll be okay," Delwyn whispered, wincing as she shifted her weight. "Are you hurt? Did they bite you?" "No," the woman said, her pale blue eyes locking onto Delwyn's. Despite the dirt and the obvious signs of prolonged abuse, there was a piercing clarity in those eyes. "Thanks to your foolish, brave heart, I am whole, but you are injured." Delwyn looked down at her shoulder. 3 deep lacerations trailed from her collarbone down to her bicep. "It's just a scratch. I've had worse working in Dominic's kitchens." She forced a tight smile. She set the phone down so the light pointed upward, illuminating the room, and began to carefully tear the clean hem of her shirt to use as a makeshift bandage. "Dominic," the woman spat the name, a terrifying low rumble escaping her chest. It didn't sound like the growl of a helpless old woman. It sounded like the rumble of an approaching earthquake. "That pompous fool cannot even secure his own borders." Delwyn froze, a shiver running down her spine. "You shouldn't speak like that," she warned softly. "If anyone hears you, Alpha Dominic is merciless. He hates outsiders." "If he finds out I hit a rogue, I am no rogue," the woman interrupted, her chin lifting with a startling amount of pride. "And you are no mere kitchen servant, child. What is your name?" "Delwyn Miller." "Delwyn?" The woman tested the name on her tongue. She reached out with a trembling hand, ignoring the silver burns on her wrists, and gently touched Delwyn's uninjured arm. "You threw yourself in front of 2 shifted males to save a stranger. Your alpha treats you as an omega, but you have the spirit of a guardian." "I don't have the spirit of anything," Delwyn muttered, tying the fabric tightly around her shoulder and biting her lip to keep from screaming. "I just couldn't watch them tear you apart." "How did you get out there? Were you kidnapped?" The woman leaned back, closing her eyes. Exhaustion was finally overtaking her. 3 months kept in a cage lined with silver by a faction of cowards hoping to use me as leverage. I managed to break the lock 2 nights ago. I have been running ever since. I smelled the gathering. I hoped to find civilization. Instead, I found madness. The mating frenzy, Delwyn explained quietly. It makes them lose their minds. But the sun will be up in a few hours. The frenzy ends at dawn. Once they sleep it off, I can sneak you out. I know a way to the highway. You can get far away from Silver Creek. The woman let out a soft, humorous chuckle. I do not plan on leaving, Delwyn. Not until my son arrives. You will have tracked my scent by now. He will tear this forest apart to find me. Your son? Delwyn asked, feeling a pang of sympathy. Poor woman. She was probably delusional from the trauma. Whoever her son was, if he crossed into Silver Creek territory uninvited, Dominic's enforcers would kill him. Okay, just rest for now. We'll figure it out in the morning. The woman nodded, her chin resting on her chest. As she breathed, a heavy silver pendant slipped from the collar of her ruined nightgown. Delwyn's eyes widened. She wasn't an expert on pack politics, but even an Omega recognized the symbol etched into the metal. A wolf skull crowned with thorns, the crest of the Obsidian Court, the royal pack. Delwyn's blood ran cold. The Obsidian Court was ruled by Darius Sterling, the Alpha King. He was a tyrant, a warlord who had united the North American territories through absolute bloody conquest. Rumor had it that he was merciless, executing alphas who defied him without a second thought. Delwyn stared at the sleeping woman, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. No, it's impossible. She can't be. She pulled her knees to her chest, shivering in the damp cold of the cellar. She had just assaulted 2 of her own pack's enforcers to save a woman who might be wearing stolen royal jewelry. If Dominic found out, she was dead. If the Obsidian Court found out she was involved, she was worse than dead. She spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening to the fading howls above, praying for the sun to rise, completely unaware that her nightmare was just beginning. Dawn broke over Silver Creek like a bruised eye, purple, red, and swollen with the aftermath of the night's violence. The music had stopped. The woods were dead silent. Delwyn nudged the cellar doors open just an inch. The coast was clear. The courtyard was littered with red plastic cups, broken bottles, and the occasional sleeping body. But the madness of the blood moon had finally passed. We need to move, Delwyn whispered, climbing out of the cellar and reaching down to help the elderly woman up. The woman was incredibly stiff, her joints popping as she moved, but she climbed out into the cool morning air. Delwyn's shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening ache. The makeshift bandage was soaked through, the edges of the wound hot and inflamed. I can get you to the edge of the property, Delwyn said, keeping her voice low. From there, it's a 2-mile walk to the interstate. A sound interrupted her, a deep rhythmic thumping that seemed to shake the very air around them. Delwyn looked up. Over the tops of the massive Oregon pines, 3 sleek black helicopters were descending rapidly towards the pack's main clearing. Before she could process what was happening, the roar of heavy engines echoed from the main road. 5 massive armored black SUVs smashed through the wooden gates of the Silver Creek perimeter, sending splintered wood flying into the air. The vehicles swerved violently into the courtyard, tires tearing up the manicured lawn and slammed to a halt. Doors flew open. Dozens of massive men poured out. They weren't dressed in the casual flannel and denim of the Silver Creek Wolves. These men wore tactical black gear, heavily armed, moving with terrifying military precision. The sleeping wolves in the courtyard woke in a panic, scrambling backward. The front doors of the pack house banged open, and Alpha Dominic stormed out, still tying the belt of his silk robe, his face red with indignation. What is the meaning of this? Dominic roared, shifting halfway, his eyes flashing gold. This is Silver Creek territory. You are violating sovereign borders. From the center SUV, a man stepped out. The moment his boots hit the gravel, the entire atmosphere in the courtyard changed. The air grew heavy, suffocatingly thick, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the space. Several of the Silver Creek wolves collapsed to their knees, physically forced down by the crushing weight of his aura. It was Darius Sterling, the Alpha King. He was a giant of a man, standing well over 64 with broad, intimidating shoulders beneath a fitted black Henley. His hair was pitch black, swept back, but it was his eyes that froze the blood in Delwyn's veins. They were a piercing, unnatural shade of icy silver, burning with a lethal, barely contained rage. Dominic's arrogant expression vanished instantly. His golden eyes dimmed, and he immediately dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "My king, we were not expecting you. If we had known." "Shut up!" Daria's voice was remarkably quiet. It had carried across the courtyard like a crack of thunder. The sheer dominance in his tone made Delwyn's knees buckle, but she forced herself to stay standing, hiding behind the thorny blackberry bush with the elderly woman. Daria walked slowly toward Dominic. Every step he took seemed to vibrate through the earth. 3 months ago, a rogue faction breached my northern border and took something that belongs to me. I have tracked their scent across 3 states. Last night, that scent crossed your borders, Dominic, said Bust. Dominic looked up, sweating profusely. "My king, I swear to you, no rogues entered my pack house. We had our mating frenzy last night. The perimeter was secured. Your perimeter is a joke." Daria snapped, stopping a few feet from the kneeling Alpha. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath through his nose. When he opened them, the silver glow was blinding. "I smell blood. I smell silver. I smell her." Daria turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the terrified crowd, the pack house, and then he looked directly at the blackberry bushes. Delwyn stopped breathing. She felt entirely exposed. "Abigail," Daria breathed, his terrifying aura cracking for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of absolute desperate vulnerability. The elderly woman beside Delwyn stepped out from behind the bushes. She didn't look frail anymore. Despite the dirt and the blood, she stood tall, holding her head high. "Daria," Abigail said softly. The Alpha King crossed the courtyard in a blur of motion. He dropped to his knees in front of the elderly woman, a sight that shocked everyone present, the most ruthless man in the world, kneeling in the dirt. He reached out, his massive hands gently taking her bruised, burned arms. He saw the silver burns on her wrists, and a low, guttural snarl ripped from his throat. A sound so terrifying it made several Omegas in the crowd whimper. "Who did this?" Daria demanded, his voice shaking with violent fury. "Who touched you?" "The rogues are dead," Abigail said calmly, resting a hand on her son's cheek. "I slipped away from them, but I would not have survived the night on these grounds, my son, if not for her." Abigail turned slightly, pointing directly at Delwyn, who was still frozen behind the bushes. Daria slowly stood up. He turned his imposing frame toward Delwyn. Delwyn wanted to run. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to flee into the woods to hide from the predatory gaze locking onto her. She stepped out into the open, clutching her bleeding shoulder, trembling uncontrollably. Daria stepped toward her. As he closed the distance, his nostrils flared. Delwyn saw his silver eyes widen. The terrifying anger in his expression suddenly shattered, replaced by an expression of pure unadulterated shock. He stopped 3 ft away from her, his chest heaving. The scent of ozone, dark cedar, and rain hit Delwyn like a physical blow, making her head spin. For a terrifying moment, the world stopped. The guards, Dominic, the pack, they all faded away. There was only the magnetic, agonizingly intense pull between the two of them. "Mate," Daria whispered, the words slipping past his lips like a prayer. A collective gasp echoed through the courtyard. The Alpha King, the ruthless tyrant, faded to a battered, bloodied Omega from a backwater pack. Delwyn stepped back, her mind reeling. "No," she whispered instinctively, terrified of what this meant. Before Daria could speak, Alpha Dominic shot up from the ground. "My king," Dominic yelled, desperate to regain control of the narrative and save his own skin. "Do not be deceived. This girl is an Omega, a lowly kitchen rat. She committed treason last night. She assaulted 2 of my highest-ranking enforcers with weapons and hit an outsider on my territory. She didn't save your mother. She kidnapped her to extort you." Daria slowly turned his head away from Delwyn, looking back at Dominic. The icy lethal demeanor returned instantly. "Is that so?" Daria asked, his voice deadly calm. Dominic nodded eagerly, sensing an opening. "Yes, Tucker and Brett are in the infirmary right now. She viciously attacked them. By pack law, she is a traitor and sentenced to death." Dominic pointed a trembling finger at Delwyn. "Guards, seize her." 2 of Silver Creek's wolves stepped forward to grab Delwyn. They didn't make it 2 steps. With a speed that defied logic, Daria moved. He bypassed his mother, bypassed Delwyn, and crossed the space to Dominic in the blink of an eye. His hand shot out, wrapping around Dominic's throat. He lifted the Silver Creek Alpha off the ground with one hand, cutting off his air supply instantly. "You dare!" Daria growled, his voice vibrating with a monstrous demonic cadence that made the very ground shake. "Threaten my mate." The silence that fell over the Silver Creek courtyard was deafening. Alpha Dominic, a man who had ruled his pack with an iron fist and unchecked arrogance for over a decade, was currently dangling 2 feet off the ground, his face turning a mottled shade of violet. He clawed helplessly at Daria's wrist, his legs kicking the empty air. "My king," Dominic choked out, his eyes bulging. Daria's expression was a mask of cold, terrifying indifference. The silver glow in his eyes intensified, illuminating the early morning shadows. "You allowed my mother to be hunted on your lands. You stood by while your enforcers tried to tear her apart. And now you dare to threaten the life of my fated mate to cover your own incompetence." Daria didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice resonated with the raw primordial power of an alpha king. "Bring them out," Daria commanded without turning his head. From the black SUVs, heavily armed members of the Obsidian Guard moved with lethal efficiency. They bypassed the trembling Silver Creek wolves and breached the infirmary doors. Less than a minute later, two massive men were dragged out into the gravel. It was Tucker and Brett. Tucker's face was severely blistered, his eyes swollen shut from the industrial bear mace Delwyn had used. Brett was sporting a massive bleeding gash on the side of his skull from the cast iron skillet. They were thrown to the ground at Daria's feet. "These are the ones?" Daria asked, his voice dropping an octave. Abigail, the Queen Mother, stepped forward, her posture regal despite her tattered nightgown. "Yes, they cornered me at the Trian. If Delwyn had not intervened, I would not have seen the sunrise." Daria released Dominic, letting the Silver Creek Alpha crash into the dirt, gasping and coughing violently for air. The king stepped over him, towering above Tucker and Brett. The two enforcers whimpered, pressing their faces into the gravel, entirely submitting to the overwhelming aura of the king. "You hunted an elder," Daria stated, his tone chillingly flat. "You hunted the Queen Mother of the Obsidian Court, and you laid your claws on my mate." At the mention of the claws, Daria's gaze snapped back to Delwyn. For the first time, he seemed to fully process the makeshift blood-soaked bandage wrapped tightly around her left shoulder. The scent of her blood, sweet but laced with the sharp tang of infection, hit him. The cold indifference vanished, replaced by a frantic, terrifying panic. Daria crossed the distance between them in a single stride. Delwyn flinched instinctively, backing up until her spine hit the rough wood of the root cellar doors. But Daria didn't grab her. He stopped just inches away, his massive hands hovering over her injured shoulder, terrified to cause her more pain. "You're hurt," he whispered. The ruthless warlord entirely replaced by a desperate, agonizingly gentle man. "He scratched you." It's just a scratch," Delwyn stammered, her vision suddenly swimming. The adrenaline that had kept her going for the past 8 hours was violently crashing. The throbbing in her shoulder was spreading to her chest, her breathing becoming shallow. "Dr. Thomas Abernathy." Now, Daria roared over his shoulder. A command that sent a tall, gray-haired man sprinting from the third SUV with a trauma kit. Delwyn looked up at Daria. Up close, he was breathtaking, but terrifying. The mate bond was a chaotic static in her mind, pulling her toward him while her survival instincts screamed at her to run. You can't just come here." And she trailed off, her knees finally buckling. Daria caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were like steel cables wrapping securely around her waist and under her knees, lifting her effortlessly against his broad chest. The warmth radiating from his body was intoxicating. "Dominic," Daria said, not looking back as he carried Delwyn towards the center helicopter. "Your territory is officially dissolved. Your assets, your land, and your pack are now under the jurisdiction of the Obsidian Court. If I ever see your face again, I will mount it on my wall." As Delwyn slipped into unconsciousness, the last thing she heard was the deafening roar of the helicopter blades spinning to life. When Delwyn finally opened her eyes, the oppressive humidity and pine scent of Oregon were gone. She was lying in a massive 4-poster bed, draped in Egyptian cotton sheets. The room was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the snow-capped Teton Range in Wyoming. She wasn't in a pack house. She was in a fortress. Panic flared in her chest. She sat up quickly, gasping as a sharp pain pulled at her shoulder. She looked down and saw that her wound had been expertly stitched, cleaned, and wrapped in pristine white gauze. She was wearing an oversized, ridiculously soft silk nightshirt that smelled faintly of dark cedar and rain, his scent. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Abigail walked in. The Queen Mother looked like a completely different person. She was dressed in an elegant cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, her silver hair styled perfectly. The only remnant of her ordeal was the stark white bandages wrapped around her wrists. "You are awake." Abigail smiled gently, taking a seat in a velvet armchair near the bed. "Dr. Abernathy was worried the infection had spread, but your fever broke in the night." "You have been asleep for 2 days, Delwyn." 2 days, Delwyn croaked, her throat dry. She looked around the opulent room. Where am I? What happened to Silver Creek? You are at the Obsidian Estate in Jackson Hole, Abigail replied, pouring a glass of water from a crystal pitcher on the nightstand and handing it to her. And Silver Creek is no more. The pack has been absorbed. Dominic is in exile. Delwyn took a shaky sip of the water. Your son, the Alpha King. He said I was his mate. Abigail's expression softened. He did. Daria has searched for his fated mate for over a decade. He had given up hope to find you. The very woman who risked her life to save mine. It is nothing short of a miracle. But he is struggling. Struggling? Delwyn frowned. He looked like he wanted to murder everyone in that courtyard. He did, Abigail admitted with a heavy sigh. Daria is not a gentle man, Delwyn. He inherited a fractured, violent kingdom when his father died. He had to be ruthless to unite the territories. He operates under the corporate entity of Sterling Global Holdings to mask our pack's wealth in the human world. But in our world, he is a warlord. And now he is utterly terrified of you. Delwyn blinked. Terrified of me? I'm an Omega. I worked in the kitchens. You are his mate, Abigail corrected firmly. To a wolf like Daria, you are his sole weakness. He has been pacing outside this door for 48 hours, refusing to come in because he is afraid his presence will overwhelm you. Before Delwyn could process that, a knock echoed through the room. The door opened and Daria stepped in. He was out of his tactical gear, wearing a simple gray t-shirt and dark jeans, but he still looked incredibly imposing. When his silver eyes locked onto Delwyn, the breath hitched in his chest. He stopped at the foot of the bed, gripping the mahogany footboard so tightly his knuckles turned white. You're awake, Daria said, his voice a growly, hesitant whisper. Abigail stood up. I will leave you two to talk. She gave Delwyn an encouraging nod and slipped out of the room, closing the door quietly behind her. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Delwyn pulled the silk sheets up to her chin. You didn't have to bring me here, she said softly. Daria flinched as if she had struck him. He slowly walked around the side of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. You were injured, infected. Dominic's pack physician was a quack. I wasn't going to leave you there to die. I wouldn't have died from a scratch, Delwyn argued, though her voice lacked conviction. I couldn't take that risk, Daria replied, his eyes dropping to a bandaged shoulder. A muscle ticked in his jaw. I should have killed that enforcer slowly. I gave him a quick death. It was a mistake. Delwyn gasped. You killed Brett. He touched my mate, Daria stated as if discussing the weather. He looked back up at her, the silver in his eyes swirling. Delwyn, I know my reputation. I know what they call me, the Tyrant King, the Butcher. But I swear to you on my life and the moon above, I will never let anything hurt you again. This estate, this pack, my wealth, my life, it is all yours. Delwyn stared at the most feared man in North America, watching him practically beg for her acceptance. It was a lot to take in, but before she could formulate a response, the heavy oak door flew open, shattering the intimate moment. A tall, impeccably dressed man rushed into the room. He had sharp, aristocratic features and cold, calculating amber eyes. It was Lord Gregory Holden, Daria's beta and the chief financial officer of Sterling Global Holdings. My king, forgive the intrusion, Holden said smoothly, though his eyes darted to Delwyn with a flash of unmistakable disdain. We have a security breach. The rogues who kidnapped the Queen Mother. We found their financial backer. Daria's demeanor shifted instantly. The gentlemate vanished and the warlord returned. Who? Holden hesitated, looking at Delwyn. It is a matter of state, sire. Perhaps the Omega should not be privy to such intelligence. A low, vibrating growl ripped from Daria's chest, rattling the glass in the windows. She is your queen, Holden, speak. Holden swallowed hard. The wire transfers were traced to a shell company in Geneva, a company owned by the Western Alliance. They were trying to use Abigail as a hostage to force you to surrender the California territories. Daria's eyes narrowed. Prepare the jet. I am going to California. For the next 3 weeks, Daria was gone. The estate was eerily quiet without him, heavily guarded by the Obsidian Guard. Delwyn spent her time healing, walking the expansive, manicured gardens and spending hours drinking tea with Abigail. Despite her Omega status, Abigail treated Delwyn as an equal. She taught her the complex politics of the werewolf world, the financial structure of Sterling Global, and the history of their bloodline. Delwyn learned that true Omegas were actually peacemakers, wolves with a calming aura meant to diffuse pack tensions, a trait that explained why she had been able to calm the Queen Mother in that dark root cellar. But Delwyn couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. It started small. She noticed Lord Gregory Holden watching her from the balconies when she walked in the gardens. She noticed that the guards stationed outside her wing were subtly shifted, replaced by men who wore Holden's specific battalion insignia. One evening, unable to sleep, Delwyn wandered down to the expansive estate library to find a book. The library was a massive 2-story room filled with ancient texts and leather-bound volumes. As she reached the second-floor balcony, she heard hushed voices below. She pressed herself against the shadows of the mahogany railing, peering down. Lord Holden was standing by the fireplace, speaking to a man Delwyn recognized as the captain of the Perimeter Guard. The Western Alliance took the bait perfectly. Holden sneered, swirling a glass of amber liquid. Daria is tearing through California, wasting resources and exhausting his men looking for ghosts. He has no idea the wire transfers were falsified. Delwyn's heart plummeted into her stomach. Falsified? Are we proceeding with the protocol, my lord? The guard captain asked nervously. Holden smiled, a cold reptilian expression. Yes. Daria is blinded by his new little kitchen rat. He left the estate vulnerable. Tonight we open the eastern gate. Let the mercenaries in. When Abigail is dead and the Omega is disposed of, I will alert the council that Daria failed to protect his own home. He will be stripped of his alpha title, and I will take the throne. Delwyn clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle her gasp. Holden was the traitor. He had orchestrated Abigail's kidnapping to weaken Daria, and now he was finishing the job from the inside. She didn't wait to hear more. She silently backed away from the balcony and sprinted down the back servant corridors. She had to find Abigail. She had to warn the loyal guards. But as she rounded the corner towards the Queen Mother's wing, 2 massive guards stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. They wore Holden's insignia. Going somewhere, little Omega. One of them sneered, reaching for her. Delwyn didn't panic. The timid girl who hid in the pantry at Silver Creek was gone. She was in the Obsidian Court now. She was the mate of the Alpha King. Using her small size to her advantage, Delwyn ducked under the guard's grasping hand, drove her heel directly into his kneecap with a sickening crunch, and grabbed a heavy brass candelabra from the hallway table. As the second guard lunged, she swung the brass base directly into his jaw, sending him crashing to the Persian rug. She burst into Abigail's room. The Queen Mother was sitting up in bed reading a novel. "Delwyn, what is it?" Abigail asked, seeing the wild look in the girl's eyes. "Holden is a traitor," Delwyn said, breathing heavily. "He's opening the eastern gate right now. Mercenaries are coming. We have to move." Abigail's eyes hardened. There was no fear, only the icy resolve of a queen who had survived decades of war. She threw off the covers. The panic room and the sub, lead the way. As they hurried through the winding corridors, the estate's alarm system suddenly blared to life. Red emergency lights bathed the hallways in a sinister glow. The sound of gunfire and heavy doors being breached echoed from the east wing. The mercenaries were inside. They reached the heavy steel doors of the panic room just as a group of 4 armed men rounded the corner. Leading them was Lord Holden himself, holding a silver-loaded pistol. Well, well, Holden chuckled, raising the gun. "The kitchen rat has some teeth. Step aside, Delwyn. This doesn't have to be messy." "You don't belong here anyway." Delwyn stood directly in front of Abigail, her chin raised. Her heart was hammering violently, but she refused to back down. "You're a coward, Holden. Daria will tear you apart." Holden's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Daria is 2,000 mi away. Goodbye, Omega." He pulled the trigger, but the bullet never reached Delwyn. The massive reinforced glass window at the end of the hallway shattered inward too with the force of a bomb detonating. A massive pitch-black wolf, larger than any natural animal on Earth, crashed through the glass, sending shards flying like shrapnel. The wolf didn't even touch the ground before it lunged. It was Daria. He hadn't been in California. He had suspected a rat in his inner circle from the moment he found the evidence in Geneva. He had faked his departure and waited in the surrounding mountains, watching his own estate to see who would make a move. Daria slammed into Holden's mercenaries like a freight train. He didn't bother shifting into his human form. The air was filled with the sickening sounds of snapping bones and terrified screams. In less than 10 seconds, the 4 mercenaries were dead, their bodies tossed aside like broken ragdolls. Holden was backed against the wall, dropping his pistol, his face pale with absolute paralyzing terror. "My king, please." Daria shifted back to his human form, standing naked and covered in the blood of the mercenaries. His silver eyes were practically glowing in the dim red emergency lights. He didn't say a word. He stepped forward, grabbed Holden by the throat, and effortlessly snapped his neck. The air in the sub-corridor was suffocating, thick with the sharp coppery scent of fresh blood and pulverized concrete. The red emergency lights bathed the scene in a hellish glow, illuminating the catastrophic damage. The reinforced glass was completely shattered, glittering across the expensive Persian runner like jagged diamonds. At the center of the carnage stood Daria. He had shifted back to his human form, his massive chest heaving with exertion. He was covered in the blood of the mercenaries he had just dismantled, his fists stained crimson. At his feet lay the broken body of Lord Gregory Holden. The man's neck snapped at an unnatural angle, his amber eyes wide with a terror that had permanently frozen his features. Delwyn stood frozen in front of Abigail, her hand still gripping the heavy brass candelabra she had used to bash a guard's face in minutes prior. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had grown up in the brutal hierarchy of the Silver Creek Pack, but she had never witnessed violence like this. This was not a drunken brawl during the mating frenzy. This was the absolute unbridled wrath of the Alpha King defending his den. Daria slowly turned his head. The feral glowing silver of his irises pierced through the dim red-lit corridor. For a terrifying second, Delwyn braced herself, the lingering instincts of an abused Omega screaming at her to submit, to drop her gaze and make herself small. But as Daria's eyes locked onto hers, the monstrous aura surrounding him vanished. He looked at the candelabra in her trembling hand, then at his mother standing safely behind her. The glowing silver faded into a soft, agonizingly human gray. He didn't speak. He simply dropped to his knees right there in the glass, and the gore, bowing his head toward Delwyn. It was an act of complete unconditional submission from the most lethal predator on the continent. Daria, Abigail whispered, her voice breaking the heavy silence. She stepped around Delwyn, her regal composure returning in an instant. She placed a hand on her son's blood-soaked shoulder. The estate is compromised. Holden had accomplices in the perimeter guard. We need to secure the northern ridge. Dario rose smoothly, the vulnerability immediately masked by the cold, calculating demeanor of a warlord. My guard is already sweeping the grounds, he rumbled, his voice rough. He looked at Delwyn one last time, an unspoken promise in his gaze. Abnathy is waiting for you in the West Wing Infirmary. Go now. The purge of the Obsidian estate lasted for 3 bloody, relentless days. Daria did not sleep. Working alongside his most trusted enforcers, he rooted out every shred of Holden's treason. The conspiracy they discovered ran deep into the human corporate world. Holden had colluded with a wealthy human politician, Senator Harrison Croft, to fund the mercenaries under the guise of an offshore logging conglomerate. Croft had wanted the mineral-rich territories of the Pacific Northwest, and Holden had promised them to him in exchange for the financial backing to overthrow Daria. On the 4th morning, Delwyn finally stepped foot inside the estate's grand war room. The room was vast, lined with digital maps and heavy oak tables. Daria stood at the head of the table, flanked by 4 massive, heavily armed guards. Kneeling on the floor before him was a bruised and battered man in a torn Armani suit. It was Simon Sterling, a distant cousin who had managed the Pack's offshore accounts and facilitated Holden's wire transfers. You betrayed your blood, Daria said, his voice deadly quiet. You sold my mother to rogues for a seat on a fake council. He drew a heavy silver-plated hunting knife from the sheath at his hip. The penalty for treason against the crown is death. Daria, wait. Delwyn's voice was soft, but it carried across the cavernous room. Every head snapped toward her. The guards tensed, unsure how to handle an Omega interrupting a royal execution. Daria froze, the knife inches from Simon's neck. He looked up, his expression softening instantly as he saw her standing in the doorway, dressed in a simple white sweater and jeans. The bandages finally off her shoulder. Delwyn, Daria breathed, stepping away from the trembling traitor. You shouldn't be in here, this isn't for you to see. Killing him won't fix the accounts, Delwyn said, stepping into the room. As she moved, a wave of profound, soothing calm radiated from her. The true dormant power of a royal Omega. The aggressive, suffocating tension in the war room immediately dissipated. The guards visibly relaxed their shoulders. Even Daria seemed to breathe easier. She walked right up to the Alpha King, ignoring the bloody knife in his hand. If you kill Simon, his assets in the Geneva shell companies automatically default to the Western Alliance. You lose the money and you lose the leverage over Senator Croft. She looked down at the weeping man on the floor. Keep him alive. Confine him to the sub-cells and force him to dismantle the offshore accounts from the inside. Bleed Croft dry legally. Destroy the senator's career so no human politician ever tries to fund a coup against you again. The silence that followed was absolute. Daria stared at her, his jaw slightly slack. He wasn't just looking at his fated mate. He was looking at a brilliant strategic mind that had been wasted scrubbing pots in Dominic's kitchens. A slow, devastatingly proud smile spread across Daria's face. He sheathed his knife. "Take him to the cells," Daria commanded the guards, "and get a laptop. He works for the Queen now." 2 nights later, the Wyoming wind howled outside the estate, whipping snow across the peaks of the Teton Range. Delwyn stood on the grand master balcony, wrapped in a thick charcoal cashmere blanket. The cold air stung her cheeks, but it felt clean, washing away the lingering metallic scent of the week's violence. The heavy glass door slid open behind her. Daria stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of steaming black tea. He handed her one, his large fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm. He stood beside her, leaning his forearms on the stone balustrade, looking out at the vast, dark wilderness that he ruled. "Abernathy says, your shoulder is completely healed," Daria said quietly, his gaze fixed on the mountains. "Barely a scar," Delwyn replied, taking a sip of the bitter tea. Daria's jaw tightened. "It never should have happened. The scratches, the mercenaries in the hallway. I brought you here to keep you safe, Delwyn, and instead I dragged you into a war zone." He finally turned to look at her, the moonlight illuminating the deep exhaustion lining his face. The silver in his eyes was muted, swirling with profound guilt. "I am a violent man, Delwyn," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I was raised to be a weapon. I snap necks. I break bones. I conquer. When I saw Holden pointing that gun at you, I didn't just want to stop him. I wanted to tear him to pieces." "I did tear him to pieces." He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her face, terrified to cross the boundary. "You are light. You bring peace to rooms that are drowning in blood. You shouldn't be shackled to a monster." Delwyn set her mug down on the stone ledge. She didn't hesitate. She closed the distance between them, reaching up and pressing her warm palms against his cold, stubble-roughened cheeks. Daria let out a ragged gasp, his eyes fluttering shut as he leaned into her touch. "You aren't a monster, Daria," she said fiercely, forcing him to open his eyes and look at her. "Holden was a monster. Dominic was a monster. You are a king who protects his people. You protected your mother. You protected me. I could give you everything," Daria whispered desperately. "I can buy you an estate in Paris, a penthouse in Manhattan. I can give you $1 billion and a dozen guards to ensure you never have to look over your shoulder again. You can have a normal, beautiful life, far away from the blood and the pack politics." "I spent my entire life hiding in the shadows of Silver Creek," Delwyn countered, her voice steady and resolute. "I hid in pantries. I kept my head down. I was normal and it nearly got me killed. I don't want to hide anymore." She stepped flush against his broad chest, sliding her arms around his neck. The mate bond flared between them, hot and intoxicating, burning away the last remnants of her fear. "I want to stand in the light and I want to stand there with you." Daria let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. His massive arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the cold stone floor and pulling her tightly against him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet vanilla scent of her skin. "Mine," he whispered, the word vibrating against her collarbone. "My mate, my queen." The following week, the Obsidian Court gathered to witness the dawn of a new era. The grand hall of the estate had been transformed. Thousands of white and silver roses hung from the vaulted ceilings. The alphas of every territory across North America had flown in. Alpha Montgomery from the Appalachian Pack, Alpha Tours from the southern border, and dozens of others. They stood in solemn, respectful rows, wearing their finest formal attire. Waiting at the end of the hall, at the top of a grand marble staircase, stood the obsidian thrones. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the hall swung open. Delwyn walked down the velvet runner. She was a vision of absolute power and grace. Abigail had commissioned a breathtaking custom-made gown of shimmering silver silk that moved like liquid moonlight. The long sleeves hid her faint scars, but her posture hid nothing. She didn't keep her head down. She didn't cower from the hundreds of predatory gazes tracking her every move. She walked with the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who had faced death, outsmarted traitors, and claimed the heart of the most dangerous wolf alive. Daria stood at the altar waiting for her. He wore a crisp, tailored black suit, but it was the look in his eyes that captivated the room. The ruthless warlord was gone, replaced by a man looking at his absolute salvation. As she reached the top of the steps, Daria took her hand, pressing a soft, reverent kiss to her knuckles. He turned to the crowd. He didn't ask for their approval. He didn't seek their counsel. From a velvet pillow held by Abigail, Daria lifted the obsidian crown, a delicate, heavy band of dark metal woven into the shape of a wolf skull and thorns studded with flawless diamonds. He placed it gently upon Delwyn's head. "Witness your queen." Daria's voice echoed like thunder through the cavernous hall, carrying the undeniable command of the Alpha King. "She who commands my heart commands this court. Her word is my law." Without hesitation, Alpha Montgomery dropped to one knee. Alpha Tours followed. Within seconds, the entire hall, every alpha, every guard, and every elder dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in unison to the newly crowned queen. Delwyn Miller, the kitchen Omega from a forgotten pack, looked out over her kingdom. She squeezed Daria's hand, feeling the solid, unbreakable warmth of her mate beside her. Finally home. What a journey. From hiding in a dusty pantry to ruling the most powerful werewolf court in North America, Delwyn's story proves that true strength isn't about physical power. It's about having the courage to do the right thing, even when you're terrified. If you loved this wild ride of fated mates, royal betrayal, and epic revenge, make sure you smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you'll never miss another thrilling story. We have plenty more Alpha Kings, hidden identities, and intense pack drama coming your way. Drop a comment below telling us what your favorite twist was.